Hello everybody, this is Luna speaking. Luna, that is, lurking under nautical artillery, which of course is quite fitting because we're recording here just next to the Les Invalides. What is Les Invalides?
Just a hop and a skip. It's a fancy, I suppose, graveyard cemetery for some of France's so-called military heroes. I hear there's a particularly small gentleman contained within there by the name of Sir Napoleon Bonaparte.
That's right, a particularly short coffin there.
Well, if you believe in English propaganda, he was average height for his time.
Anyway, there's a very impressive rank of cannons with some nice topiary and some very well carved little trees there as well.
Yes,
edges carved into symmetrical forms, as the French will do.
Yes, with rabbits traversing the fields.
Rabbits?
Yeah, rabbits. They brought them in during, I think it was either the Second World War or the First World War, because people were starving and they needed a supply of food, basically. So they brought in rabbits and have just lived there ever since. So if you're
Dear
lucky,
listeners, I think Val is hungry again. Talking about rabbits.
Yeah.
This is episode 20. We're super happy. This is a special episode. We're going back to our roots. We're going back to the idea of this being an introductory podcast, an introduction to philosophy. And so we're concentrating on some really simple and yet massive questions. What is a human mind? And
what is a human body? We're going back to the basics. And for this episode 20, we have a special guest, Daniel Yslas, who's joining us. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel, as Valentin clearly said. I'm a student here at AUP, and I study politics, philosophy, and economics. I've only had a few basic introductory texts, or read a few basic introductory texts to philosophy. I'm not really well-developed, if you will, or rather someone who understands the breadth of the field, especially from a bachelor's level.
Yeah.
But I'm trying.
Well, that's all right. You came to the right place, because neither do I. I have my knowledge is completely cursory, but that's what we're here to do, right? This is one of the foundational gestures of philosophy. It's to investigate, right? It's one of the central injunctions of Spinoza.
yeah, and that's what Luna's all about as well. I mean, Luna is basically our collective exploration as neophytes in the field of philosophy.
Yes.
And I thought, maybe in this introductory vein, maybe we just explore a little bit. Like, we're going to obviously look at how Spinoza treats these questions. What is a human mind? Because he has this absolutely innovative and striking concept of a human mind.
Yes, and quite elegant.
Yeah. But to give some context, I thought we could just talk very briefly about what other philosophers have said in response to this question. What is a human and what is a human mind?
Yeah, and why it's an important question, politically, we kind of associate, consciousness with a certain form of personhood, right? It's one of the ways in which we kind of distinguish ourselves, from the animals, for example. That's one of the classic things. Human consciousness is a special quality that separates humanity from the rest of all in existence, right? That's a very kind of old point of division, right? What is a human?
But do we? I mean, the whole question is are we actually properly distinguished from the animals, or is that just a millennia-old prejudice?
Yeah, well, I think Descartes has a little bit of the responsibility for referring to animals as mere automaton. They do not possess a spirit or a soul or a mind in the same way that we do.
But at the same time, he was very impressed by automatons.
Of course, yeah.
Unlike Aristotle. So, here I think we should have a vote. Who are you going to go with? We're going to have Aristotle's definition of human beings.
Yeah.
We're going to pop Rousseau in there as well.
Yeah.
We can put Hobbes in there. We can put Marx in there as well. And then we're going to have a vote. We're going to go for the one that we really like.
Okay,
right?
easy, yeah.
And I think that one of the big questions about animality for Descartes is that he, at least against Aristotle, said that matter can actually animate itself.
Yes.
Right? Because you have Aristotle, as my teacher Val Plum would love to actually argue, Aristotle has this active principle of form that imparts all determination and definition upon matter, which is purely passive and inert.
Yes.
And it's just imprinted.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So without a theory of the soul or a mind, then it's just like animals really just don't have any kind of existence. They really are just matter.
Yeah, but matter is elevated by Descartes to a certain extent because he's the one who investigates the circulatory system.
Yes.
He's the one who explains how the heart's a pump and you have this circulation of blood through the arteries and then back through the veins, such that you can have an animal's body which is just like a machine and it will move on its own. It doesn't need to be animated, as it were, by the soul, right? Because it's got its own. So he gives these machinic bodies autonomy.
Some kind of autonomy. How very generous of him.
Well, I just want he's an easy target, and so so Daniel, I've heard a rumor that you're a bit of a Marx reader. Is that correct, or is that just like calumny? Is that
no?
True?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a Marx reader. I've read some basic introductory texts, such as like I read the Communist Manifesto, but recently I finished Materialism and Imperial Criticism.
Oh wow! Okay,
and that has been very interesting. I actually really enjoy the book.
Yeah,
in terms of like I would say it's like an anti-metaphysical stance, but still within the realms of metaphysics, as in like the meta category of philosophy. But I really much enjoyed the book.
And how did you get into that? Like, how did you hear about the book? Or
so I I used to be a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party here in France.
Oh right.
And while I was there, I purchased they had like an English translation of it at like one of our meetings. I picked it up there and then it sat on my shelf until I started talking with Valentin about it.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, Lenin gives a very kind of interesting theory of consciousness, right, in that kind of book. He says, for the materialists, right, the world exists outside of ourselves objectively, and it is the world that impresses itself upon our minds, which sounds like a kind of empiricism, but, he distinguishes it in very particular ways, right? But it's very much the classic kind of materialist position of, matter precedes consciousness, right? So this is it's not about the absolute autonomy of the mind moving about the world, but it's the way in which the objective world is outside that impresses itself upon us, which is a very Spinozist kind of point.
Yeah, he says around like 100 times in the book that like the materialist line is that nature is primary and spirit is secondary. That nature, matter, objective reality is primary. Yeah. Soul, mind, consciousness, everything else is secondary compared to nature.
Well, this is this is a great connection for us because this obviously goes back to Marx talking about his concept of species being, or generic being, which encapsulates the sense of the plasticity of humanity, and it's plastic because it's shaped by historical and social forces.
Yes.
First amongst which are of course the mode of production.
Yes.
With both the forces of production and then also the actual relations of production. Yes. How do you relate to your boss or master or whatever?
Yeah, exactly.
And have you inherited that notion of hierarchy?
Yes, and what is your position within that structure? How are you determined by the relations of production in your given historical moment, right?
Right, so for Marx, he says, Marx actually says, we're not distinguished from animals by reason or anything else. He says that we distinguish ourselves as a historical and practical kind of moments by organizing and cooperating in securing things to eat and shelter.
We produce our means of existence and we produce our social relations, and that changes given the historical moment, right?
Yeah, but so does an elephant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Marx couldn't do everything, Yeah, this is part of a long line of slander against Marx, where you see on Twitter people being like, "Well, Marx didn't consider." This is you. Marx didn't consider the elephant.
I'm not worried about slander against Marx. I'm worried about slander against the animals. What about the bees? They're organising their mode of production.
Well, I mean, but
they've got social relations. There's the queen.
Yeah,
they're the worker bees, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like Marx's point in more generally is that we through labor we transform the material world through use of tools, etc., to suit our particular needs, right? You don't see an elephant walking around in a linen jacket, right? We produce that because we're too cold. Yeah.
Have you seen a honeycomb?
I'm not knocking them.
You can see like there's like assassin bugs that like when they kill like the other bugs, they do wear their corpses as like a form of armor.
Yes. And I mean, yes, of course, cuttlefish.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, you know, there's loads of examples of, you know, rudimentary tool use, you know, in the animal kingdom, or like cuttlefish using shells, etc.
Yeah, that's more than tool use. That is like wearing a trophy of your military victory.
Yeah.
You know, that is like pride. That is like, you know, glory, basically. Yeah. There you go. It's Hobbes. It's Hobbes' state of nature. This has taken us straight to Hobbes and his definition of human beings. What are human beings for Hobbes? We are desiring beings.
We are desire that is structured in a particular way. We don't desire just in any direction. We desire violently.
We desire what gives us pleasure.
Yeah,
right?
which is apparently the possessions of everyone else.
Well, it's nobody else has. There are no possessions, right? It's just a thing that somebody else happens to be sitting on. And if we can push somebody off that anthill, we'll push them off that anthill
and acquire it for ourselves.
That's right. There are no possessions in the state of nature.
Yes.
So I'm not going to have you like slandering Hobbes either.
There are no there's no property in the state of nature, but you know, one of the things that makes the state of nature violent for Hobbes is the desire to possess what the other has. Right, that is part of the that's why the state of nature is completely violent for Hobbes, is because we're all desiring what everyone else has.
We're all assassin bugs.
Yes, exactly.
We all want to wear the other's carcasses. Yes. You know, it's vainglory, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, we have Hobbes. You know, it's easy to caricature, you know, Hobbes's position in the Leviathan, but then we have the nicer Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You
think he's nice? Explain how nice this guy is to me.
Well, you know, terrible father, but you know, if we think about his conception of, you know, the human being, it's, you know, we're all kind of marked by this practice of perfectibility, right? We're all striving towards this kind of, you know, bettering ourselves, you know, almost in a kind of, you know, post-Spinoza way, you know, we're always moving towards perfection, you know.
You're having a techno-optimist moment there, you know, and I really have to stop you there because the whole point about perfectibility, as I read it, is that you think that you're making things better, right? But actually, you're weakening yourself and you're accruing disadvantages, historical disadvantages at the same time, right? So you've got a sling, right?
Yeah.
Like either it's David against Goliath, or there's a particular nasty mammoth which is going through your forest, right? So you suddenly think, I'm not just going to throw this like rock at its head.
Yeah.
I'm going to get this sling and I'm going to hurl it at about, 10 times the velocity that I can actually throw it, right? And Rousseau says, fine, you killed, Andy the mammoth, right? And you've got enough meat for like a couple of years there if you learn to smoke it. But you are now, henceforth, you're going to lose strength in your shoulders. Right?
I mean, this is pretty
because you just don't have to throw the stone as hard. Right?
But I mean, that's a bit, but hold on.
Well, wouldn't you be able to argue with like let's say you're hunting with like a bow, even though like your shoulders get weakened there, your back gets stronger.
Okay, that's a good point. But I'll give you your stronger back.
But also, I feel like this is.
But what about the yew trees? The yew trees get chopped down.
I feel like this is like an old kind of reactionary point in ancient Greece at the moment of the creation of writing, where they said, we used to memorize every single thing. Once we start writing things down, our mind is going to wither because we can no longer contain all of Homer's Odyssey through memory. This is the same reactionary argument every time technological change emerges.
You're talking about my life, Val. When I was an undergraduate, I memorized in Shakespeare's apocryphal play Titus Andronicus.
Yeah.
I memorized the part of Marcus.
Yeah.
And I performed it in a whole run, right? And now I can't even remember my neighbour's name.
Yeah. I can still remember phone numbers from back when there were landlines, but I'll be damned if I remember anyone's mobile phone number.
Actually, that's like an interesting thing that humans do, maybe specifically, is actually the offloading of like information and cognitive function onto the environment around them.
Absolutely. I offloaded it onto my wife. She's basically my memory for my social life.
It's like,
she knows everybody.
Where did I put this? Who's this? Who did we talk to yesterday?
Where are my keys? Yeah.
But Rousseau has in my reading, has a very kind of Spinozist moment, because, he says one of the things, what is one of the motivations for forming the social contract? It's because as a collective, you are better able to act than as an individual. Right?
Right, yeah.
And so for me, yes, he's like, there's a trade-off when you enter into the social contract, but, the motivation behind that is because you are able to act in a greater extent in the world as part of a collective than you as individual with your little sling. Actually, no, I shouldn't diss the sling. Actually, you always hear the story of David and Goliath, but have you seen a video of like somebody using a sling, like a proper one?
Oh, it's pretty impressive.
Oh, it's like I did not know because I'm like, how did Goliath get? It's like it's a rock. Like I'm thinking, like
I used to think it was slingshot when I
like
heard the old
slingshot.
Stories.
Oh right, yeah, with the elastic band,
And
yeah,
I'm
the
like-
Y shapes, yeah.
I'm like, but when you see the actual videos of what slings were, it's like the velocity at which just because we're going to be talking about the movement of bodies later, the velocity at which you can actually launch a stone with a sling is just I recommend going and looking at some videos.
Well, when it comes to slaying giants, I'm with Odysseus. I think
Yeah.
a good sharp stick right through the eye of the Cyclops
Yeah.
is absolutely perfect.
Yes.
And in terms of like going back to like Rousseau's conception of like the freedoms you gain and lose, right? I think there's something totally said that like Rousseau's absolutely correct that like even though you lose your freedoms of individual freedom by joining like a collective society, you gain things such as like the freedom of language, your ideas and the things you can think about expand because now you have this relational way of like communicating with people and understanding things.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a whole horizon of different, also of different orientations that the collective can take. Like, where are we going to settle? When are we going to hunt? Are we going to start being careful about the seasons, that kind of thing. But I think I just want to come back to our choice here between like Aristotle and Kant and Marx and Hobbes and which definition of humanity we want to go for. And I just want to plug Aristotle again.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because he actually says human beings are political animals.
Yes.
Right? And it's not just because we're collective, because he actually does know his animals, right? He's written a whole book on the movements of animals, right?
Yeah, so he's credited with being one of the founders of what we now call biology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So he recognizes that you've got bees, he recognizes that you've got ants, right? And he says, look, we are political animals because we use voice, right? And how do we use voice? And he makes this really interesting distinction in between using voice, right, and crying. Right, or screaming, right? And what do we use to use voice? Voice is articulate, and we basically articulate two things: what is harmful, right, and what is advantageous, and what is just and what is unjust. So as soon as in a collective you start to articulate those couples, right? He says that's when you have politics emerge, and that's when we actually define ourselves. So what does Aristotle say about animals, right? He says that they don't have voice. What they have are like grunts, right? And what they're expressing is basically pain or pleasure.
Right.
So this is in the beginning of the Politics, and it's one of the most amazingly beautiful and dense like philosophical texts I have ever read. And basically what he's doing is he's giving us a genesis story of the political body. So basically it's just a bunch of people, then they become a village, then villages clump together, and then you get a political body.
Yeah, it becomes
And
city-states.
Yeah. And basically what he's saying is we as human beings, we actually become human by joining a city and becoming active citizens. So if you're not an active citizen, if you're just a couch potato, you're not human, according to Aristotle.
Yes, I mean, there's also, he says, if you're not being an active citizen, while at the same time saying, here are all of the categories of people who are excluded from being citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very exclusive, it's very patriarchal, but you can readapt his system and just say, everybody, right? Everybody could become more human by actively participating.
Yes.
Right, in the life of the city, by saying the difference between what's harmful and what's advantageous for the collective, and what's just and what's unjust for the collective.
And I think this is also an important point to keep in mind whenever you're engaging with a thinker and you come across something you find disagreeable in their work. Don't be afraid to read them against themselves.
Exactly.
Work out what the contradiction is, and sometimes within their own system, there's every philosopher will have contradictions in their own system, and you can use those points to read them against themselves, right? You can use their own arguments to show their weak points.
This is a very French technique.
Incredibly
This is the
French,
détournement that is dear to Guy Debord, for example. Yeah.
Yes.
So, what's so special about Spinoza's approach to this question, Val? Like, why? I mean, what's exciting about reading Spinoza on what is a human mind?
Well, I mean, it makes you feel part of something bigger than yourself. You know, he situates you immediately. You're in the mind of God, right?
You're in the mind of God.
You're being thought by God.
You're being thought by God. You're a vehicle.
Yeah, you're a passive. No, well, this is where we're going to get into some of the nuances. But he does, just because we were talking about this over the previous 2 episodes. You know, he started out with what is the mind of God. God is this infinity of the attribute of of the attribute of thought. So that is one of God's infinite attributes. And so the human mind is a part of that infinity, right? It's a particular expression of the infinite mind or the infinite thought of God. So already that's a bit disorienting. It's a bit of a big claim, right?
Yeah, and if you want to, I mean, another approach to Spinoza on what is a human mind is that of going to watch the Pixar movie Inside Out.
Yes.
Or is it called Vice Versa?
I think vice versa is probably the weird French translation.
That's the French translation, right.
It is Inside Out.
So, quick shout out to Laurent de Sutter, like great intellectual and editor as well. And he actually claimed that Inside Out, he was the first one that I read who said Inside Out is a Spinozian film.
Okay, yeah.
Because of basically you've got this like contest in between joy and sadness,
yes,
which we'll get into later. Now, it's not Spinozian because you've got a man inside the machine. You've got somebody like piloting a human being from the inside. That is totally against Spinoza, right?
You know,
because we're a mesh of affects and we're like one with the external world for Spinoza.
Yeah.
But it is one way of approaching Spinoza, and I just want to put a quick contrast in there. What's so different about Spinoza for me is that most of the time, I think our folk psychology is a little bit like Plato's in Book 4 of the Republic.
Okay. Yeah.
In that I have always thought of the human mind a little bit like a dusty cupboard.
Oh.
Right? A dusty cupboard with different shelves, okay? And up the top, you have like reason, okay? And your capacity to join the ideas, to think, to join the intelligible place and to think the essence of things, right? And then at the middle level, right, you've got courage and spirit and what we call willpower and like get up and go, that kind of sense of spirits, right? And then because he's got a tripartite theory of the soul, Plato, down the very bottom you've got all the nasty appetites and urges and desires and instincts and drives and everything that gets you into trouble, right? And there's a really definite hierarchy. It's reason up the top, it's like spirit in the middle, and then you've got the nasty stuff in the bottom drawer. Yeah. Right? And
that's a well-organized cupboard.
Exactly. And basically Spinoza explodes this cupboard. He's not having any hierarchy.
Yes. Well, I mean, this is kind of like... Yeah, and this is what I like about his kind of fearsome egalitarianism, because, when I make this kind of abstract sounding claim where it's like, the human mind is just a part of God, we have to remember that, for Spinoza, because it's all one substance, there are no inequalities at the ontological level between things, right? For Spinoza, he's going to give us a very different conception of the human mind. And I think for me, I was thinking about this on the metro today. What I like about it is the definition that he gives of the human mind. Right, so he's been talking to us about, this infinity of God, and then he goes, okay, well, what is a human mind? A human mind is a very particular thing. It is the idea of a body, and not just any body, of an actually existing body. And that actually existing body, the first one is your own body. So already he's just gone for the jugular of Descartes, right? He's going, I'm getting rid of this kind of mind-body dualism, and I'm just going to rigorously articulate how the mind interacts with the body, right? And I'm going to do that first by saying that the human mind is the idea of the body, and more specifically, an actually existing body.
Yeah, but I mean, I reckon like Plato is rolling in his grave.
Yeah.
Right? Because don't you think, Daniel, that this like, it's too down to earth, like it just like ties and weighs our minds down because they're just you just end up being. It sounds to me like your mind is just this obsession with your body.
I think there's like something to be said that it kind of your mind is kind of an obsession with your body. It's about like how your body interacts with other things, like the physicality and how it interacts with other bodies, right? And like even then, other minds and other ideas.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to be patient a bit, Ol. Sometimes I feel like you're jumping the gun. You know, this is just the first definition. Like, this is just the first kind of starting point, right? This is Proposition 11 in Part 2. This is.
But I don't like Proposition 11.
Oh, well,
Look, I'm a hypochondriac. I do not want my mind to be completely anchored to my body.
That just sounds like
my body's
problem.
a mess.
That sounds like, but it's okay. I mean, he already said that your mind is not just this singular thing. It's already a part of God. So don't worry about it. There's other things out there. It's not just.
Those other things are a mess as well. Like, my body is one mess amongst other messes.
Wow. This is I feel like you've got an inadequate idea of the world around you, right? But he's going to start us off at this point, right? And then he's going to start building, right? Because luckily, this is very lucky for you, Ol. Your mind isn't just your obsessional kind of hypochondriac ideas of your body, right? Your mind extends beyond just your own body. So don't worry, we're going to get that.
Okay, but like the first thing I don't get, right? So personally, I don't know about you, but I have ideas, right? I have ideas. That's how I speak about it.
I don't know.
I've been taught to speak about my mental activities. Like, I'm remembering something, I'm wishing for something, right? Yeah. And so I very much have always gone with that sort of idea of the mind as a kind of theatre, that kind of metaphor, right? And he says the mind is an idea.
Yes.
I mean, that's just crazy. The mind it doesn't have ideas in the plural. It is an idea.
Yes. At the beginning. But we're gonna go more into this. But yeah, it's a kind of really bizarre claim. The mind itself is an idea, but this is exactly the rationality. It is an idea. This is why he's trying to put you into relationship with God, Ol. And I feel like you live in denial. You live in denial of this fact that you partake in the infinity of thought.
I am perfectly happy to be part of nature, right?
Or your nature, then, if you want to.
Yeah, I just want to every now and then elevate myself above the muck.
This is just your anthropomorphic, humanistic hubris, where you were trying to elevate yourself above nature. No, you were a part of nature. You were being thought within nature. Yeah, your mind is an idea amongst other ideas in the infinity of nature, if that makes you feel better.
Okay, but allow me to have quite a few ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, so my mind is an idea in which there are other ideas.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I've started to think of my mind with Spinoza as a kind of arena.
Yeah.
Right? I've got an arena.
Yes.
And for some reason my arena is kind of translucent and pearly.
Okay.
In a certain arena.
Yeah.
and there are other shimmering pearly ideas taking place within this arena.
Yeah.
It's like, a show on ice for winter, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so my question is just intuitively, what are the limits of that idea that is my mind? How big is it? Where does it, if you say it's a global or a general idea, it's like a kind of total idea, right?
Yeah.
Which is populated with other little ideas.
Yes.
And he does say, if I'm not mistaken, that we can have an idea of an idea of an idea.
Yes.
Which one can always do if one partakes of certain substances, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Not a good idea.
Existence.
Yes. One exists.
Am I allowed to shout out substances here? Or
there is only one substance.
Yeah, come on.
You know that, Val. There's only one substance, and it is divine.
I'm out here defending this singular substance. I don't know what other substances you're talking about.
We're back with the mushrooms again.
Aristotle. I've always called you an English empiricist, and you've never broken with it. You and your multiple substances. There's just one. Okay, so your question is, of course, I have what seems like an infinite number of thoughts, or I have a potential to have an infinite number of thoughts if I start following the causal chain. So what brackets it is kind of your question, right? And the way that Spinoza is going to kind of solve this is in a kind of, I wouldn't call it necessarily a negation, but he does remind us that even though it appears to us that all of the thoughts in my mind are potentially infinite, only God or nature is infinite, right? We are still finite moments within nature or God, right? There is a beginning and an end to your thought as a finite being, right? You come into existence at a certain point in this infinite chain of cause and effect. You as a finite individual end, but that's a very kind of basic picture, because it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think you're onto the right train of thought here, because as with all great philosophers like Spinoza, has always got an answer for your questions. And my question of what are the limits of this idea that is my mind, he's got an answer to this right at the very beginning of book 1. Yeah. Where he actually defines finite beings, right?
You are not infinite.
Yeah, he says a thing is said to be finite in its kind, like my mind, if it can be limited by another thing of the same nature.
Yes.
So basically, and that's an active definition, so he's basically saying that your mind is limited insofar as it bangs up against somebody else's mind.
Yeah.
So when do you find the limits of your mind? When you have an argument.
Yes, when you exactly.
Because otherwise you presume that everybody thinks like you do.
Which is probably the most inadequate, confused, and mutilated idea that anyone could possibly have.
I thought you were about to say middle-aged idea.
I think there's also another understanding of it where the only ideas you can have are ones that are contingent upon almost the objective reality. They bring up the circle and the rectangles earlier, where there's an infinite amount of rectangles within a circle.
Yeah,
right.
Each of these are could be considered a different idea within almost that objective reality.
Oh yeah, that's a better way of understanding the circle. We got confused about that circle example.
Yeah.
So the circle is the objective reality.
Yeah,
and then you have all these possibilities opening up of the different rectangles that can be drawn, the intersecting lines.
Yeah, exactly. Or I think how kind of even Lenin and Marx envision something similar is you do have objective reality, substance, etc., and then thought and extension are contained within that objective reality. Yeah. So everything that you think of and everything that exists can only be contained within that substance. In this case, God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are going to get a theory of encounters later on.
We are. Yes.
Yeah. So how to meet people.
Yeah.
How to meet the right kind of people.
How to get along. How to get along. What's that? Just a silly book that got made into a film. How to Lose Friends and Alienate People with Simon Pegg.
I have never seen that film.
What was it? Yeah. Anyway, doesn't matter. But yes, it's a way in which your mind interacts with other minds, because he also says that a thought can be limited by another thought, but a thought cannot limit another body, and vice versa.
Because all causality is internal to each attribute.
Yeah.
So thoughts are caused by thoughts.
Yeah.
And bodies and their properties are caused by other bodies.
Yes, but he says very specifically, and I think this is important distinction. It's limited, right? He says thoughts can only be limited by other thoughts.
Sure.
Right? But yes, it's that kind of causal relationship, because it's again, this is where you're being very impatient with Proposition 11. It's not just your thoughts about the body. There's going to be more thoughts, because you don't contain all of the thoughts in existence. Right. Only God does.
And also, we're not just encountering other human minds and finding out the limit of our minds through these encounters. We're also encountering the mind of God.
Yes.
Of course. And this is one of the parts that it sounds super pretty. I really like this. He says, a human mind is part of the mind of God insofar as it has an adequate idea.
Yes.
Right. We don't know what an adequate idea is yet.
No.
Right. But when you get things right, you're one with God.
Yeah.
That's not bad. Usually you have to climb up a mountain, spend 9 years, grow your hair very long.
I was telling you.
Some people go back to substances.
Exactly. All kinds of ascetic practices. You have to join a particular church, give up your worldly belongings, shave your eyebrows off.
Here, it's all you need to do is read Spinoza's Ethics, and you can find God.
Well, you could just read a basic textbook in mathematics and do some exercises and get them right, and you're part of the mind of God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, technically any thought that you have is part of the mind of God. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
But it's not an adequate idea.
Yeah, because God understands your mistakes and your erroneous perceptions and your confusions and your prejudices.
Well, it's just a part of it,
Because they're all they're all part of a causal nexus, right? You, Val, have your prejudices for very certain reasons.
Oh, absolutely. All of my prejudices are well reasoned, well argued,
They can be explained by a history of encounters.
Exactly. I have an adequate idea of the causes of my prejudices.
I think what's also interesting about Proposition 11, it's the first look at this panpsychic take that Spinoza has, where there's a correlation between body and mind, but everything has that correlation. There's that parallel. Everything basically has a mind. Everything has a consciousness, a spirit, if you will.
Yeah. Or there is an idea of everything in existence, right? So maybe, because we have to be careful with our terminology. I do agree. But there is, insofar as there is nature's mind or God's mind, there is an idea of every single body or every single thing in existence, right? So, but the human mind is something, I suppose, in particular, because, as, Ol has been struggling with so much, it is not a fiction. It's not the idea of a fictional object or a fictional thought, right? It is where he.
So begins, we're not in the Matrix.
No, we're not in the Matrix.
The Matrix is an idealist presumption, right? It's
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a body that the mind. Yeah, your mind is the idea of a body that actually exists. He does specify this. It's not an idea that doesn't correspond to a body. And he starts with your own body, Isn't that right? Oh, this is Proposition 12, Everything that occurs in the human body is also perceived by the mind, right?
Look, that's just awkward.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sorry, but, this is, it's the second something goes wrong in your body, it's like Lacan's famous example of, when you have a toothache and you always kind of, you're always kind of feeling that, this pain, and you're always kind of searching for the location of this pain, that when you're in pain, right, it structures all your thinking, all your thoughts change. You're like, oh, I just need to get, I can't concentrate, I can't do I can't do anything, I'm like just thinking about this thing that's happening inside of the body, right? And this also reminded me of another example, because I was reading Milan Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being the other day. And there's this scene where Teresa is she's recounting her experience of going to meet Tomasz, the love of her life, for the first time. She's going to visit him in Prague, and she has this terrible stomach ache, and her stomach is grumbling, and she's like, "Oh, this is the thing. Like, he's going to hear this and be disgusted." I'm like, all of her thoughts are organized around her body, right? And she has this kind of beautiful way of describing, because her body is betraying her, she feels that her soul is not able to she gives the image of, sailors rushing to the ship of the deck. She's saying, my body is betraying me. So, yeah, absolutely. If something happens in your body, you absolutely know what's, what's happening. Not exactly, you may not know exactly what's happening.
I've got a two-step dialectic for you here.
Oh,
right?
no, not that. No, we're not.
This is the first step. The first step is the argument from cancer.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
So unfortunately, nowadays, and we can use Spinoza to think this through, we are continually absorbing and accumulating various forms of toxins from our environments.
Yeah.
Right?
It's got microplastics
exactly.
all over the body.
They're accumulating in the lungs, in the brain. Testosterone levels in men across the developed world are falling.
Plunging down.
We've got endocrine disruptors happening, so your hormones are being played hell with. And so you can have what I think, Leibniz, and this is one of the things that Deleuze goes crazy about, you have imperceptible perceptions. You actually have things that are happening to your body slowly, and they're kind of beneath the threshold of perception. Now, there are two different types. One is, of course, the famous thing, the frogs are in the water, which is gradually heated, and they don't realize until they actually get boiled alive, right? Yeah. So as you grow older, right, you accept as normal levels of fatigue as soon as you wake up that if you were 19 years old, you go, what the fuck, like, what's going on? There must be something wrong with me to be this tired when I wake up.
Felt it today.
As soon as I hit my 30s, that's when the switch went. I went, okay, I get it now. Yeah.
So that's gradual change. You accept as normal levels of back pain, weaknesses in your, in your muscles that 20 years ago weren't there at all, right? But then there are other things that even when you were in your teens, you were not perceiving that you're imbibing. I mean, certain toxins you're imbibing, right? You're aware of it, right? You're doing it on purpose, right?
These are the famous substances you were mentioning.
Exactly.
Even like smog in the air.
Yeah,
right.
With car pollution,
Yeah. What city did you grow up in?
Lincoln, Nebraska.
Now, what's that like?
It's a really actually rural place. So the air is actually really clean. I come from like a very natural area. It's quite a beautiful place to live. Okay. I love my home, Nebraska. Rolling plains, cows. It smells bad when you're around the cows, but
How did you get? Can you tell us how did you get from Nebraska to Paris? Like what does that journey look like?
Yeah, it's like around 18. I was like, I'm not doing well enough in high school to go to college. My grades are doing pretty poor, Sorry, how political can I get with this? The United States,
as much as you want.
As much as you want. Yeah.
So the United States, with their predatory recruiting system, they go to like the high schools and they're specifically looking for people who have like low grades, etc., so they can pitch them this package deal of, well, if you serve in the military,
this is the U.S. Army.
Yeah, the U.S. military.
Right.
They'll pitch you this deal where, you come serve for us for 36 months in active duty, we'll pay for your college.
Wow.
So I did that for 4 years, deployed to Afghanistan, lived in Texas, lived in Korea, lived in a couple places in the United States. And then in 2022, I was getting out of the military and I was like, hey, where is the coolest place I can go with the GI Bill? Happened to be Paris. And it took me 2 more years to get here. But it's been a beautiful journey so far. I love it.
Yeah. And you were you already into philosophy in high school, or was it when you were in the army you discovered philosophy? Like, what was that?
Yeah, it's kind of like both. I think a lot of people's first introduction to philosophy. Sorry, I twisted the tip.
No, it's all good.
But the first introduction to people's philosophy is usually pop philosophy.
Right.
So I'm happy enough that I avoided the Stoic nonsense that's going on right now.
Yeah.
And my first introduction was existentialism, like Nietzsche, Albert Camus, Sarge, Kierkegaard.
Oh, cool. Right.
And that was super impactful on my life. I discovered that meaning isn't real.
Oh,
right. And then you can move on from there.
No, you can strike. But how did you encounter these existentialist philosophers? Was it via online, or were you in a bookstore, or what was the kind of initial, or somebody was talking to you about it and you went, oh, that sounds interesting?
Yeah, so you hear, I originally got it from my friend group and who I was hanging out with. They'd talk about Nietzsche and religion and God. It was a big subject for me growing up. Yeah. Then you go on the internet is just up and coming. I guess it's 2016, so it's not up and coming, but it's in the later Wild West period.
Yeah.
So you just start kind of watching YouTube videos and reading online and trying to challenge your buddies in arguments and debates. And that was fun. But I quickly kind of grew out of my existentialist period when I joined the military, and things started getting more real for me, and I got into political philosophy.
Okay.
And specifically after my deployment to Afghanistan, I got into Marxism and that kind of political philosophy.
And you reckon that's fascinating? So there's actually a connection between your experience of being deployed in Afghanistan and this switch towards Marxism, or
yeah. Not to get too much into my personal details, but obviously there's horrible stuff going on during the deployment. I'm essentially a tool for U.S. imperialism during this time, right? It's specifically my boot and my friend's boots on the necks of the people in Afghanistan who's doing this occupation, who's doing kind of this a tormenting of the people. And with that experience, I had some self-reflection. I go home, I start thinking what put me in this position, why am I here, and then my buddy pitches Marxism to me. I start reading the Communist Manifesto. I start reading disparate Marx quotes. I start reading other Marxists, and that leads me into kind of this journey now where I've kind of become this full-blown radical Marxist who is joining political parties and trying to radicalize other students.
Great. Okay, that's fascinating. Yeah. There you go again. It's a real context, a real experience that actually starts to enable you to think differently. In a way.
I think specifically, I think we might get into this with habit formation, but the way you interact with the world specifically changes like your brain chemistry, right?
Yeah.
Like I would say the United States military, every military on the world does this. They're specifically trying to brainwash you into like a patriotic ideology and ingrain specific modes of thought and like actions so that they become habitual, and then you can perpetuate that with other people.
Maybe it was like there were moments for you of cognitive dissonance, you know, to use a contemporary term, in that you had the sort of ingrained habit of there are various things you have to do with a flag, there are various ways in which you have to salute and you draw up, there's a military discipline.
A certain set of ideas.
Yeah, and physical practices. And then that would jar or wouldn't quite like match with some of the reality of what you were seeing in the communities on
absolutely.
the ground.
To give like an example of this, I got put in a position where I started training other soldiers who were like coming in, who were like brand new to like the job or whatever, and I realized that I was training them in the same way that obviously everyone trains people in the same way that they were taught.
Sure.
But in the specific way I was taught was, I would say, very confrontational, very rude, and like is not what I would consider a pleasurable experience or even one conductive to like a heightened learning environment. And I got this cognitive dissonance when training other people. I didn't realize until like after my mistakes or like my brutal treatment of them if they made a mistake that I actually don't like this. This is what happened to me, and I was very upset in that position when it happened to me.
Right.
And now I'm doing it to someone else because the system around me has habituated this form of practice.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like obligated I'm obligated in a way to treat them in the same way I was.
So it's like at a moment of institutional reproduction, you had like a kind of ethical realization.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, to use an analogous kind of example, you know, isn't this the classic experience of people who become parents and they have that moment of realization, oh my God, I've become my parent. You know, I am doing the things to my child that hurt and upset me when I was growing up, right? So it's, you know, obviously it's just a kind of analogous example, but, you know, this is kind of what Spinoza's getting at, right? We have this kind of set of ideas, right? And they become habits. And, you know, to go back to your kind of cancer example, well, you know, the argument from cancer example you were using, you know, I think it does, you know, I'm trying to think of how Spinoza might respond to that, where he's like, okay, he's saying that the mind has, you know, the mind perceives what is going on in the body, but we have inadequate ideas of what is happening in our body, but there is a link there. I think he's just trying to establish a link. He's like, you don't know, you're not aware of every single thing that's happening, and you're not having an active thought of, you know, oh yeah, my heart is pumping or whatever. I don't have an active thought of every single thing that's happening. But you can investigate it, right? What he's trying to establish is the link between them. Yeah. Right?
No, you can investigate it. And this is, you remember I told you I've got like a dialectical two-step here.
Oh, so I stopped you at the first step.
Yeah, you stopped me at the first step, which is not very dialectical.
I'm very anti-Hegelian, negation and negation.
Let me get to my second step, all right? So here I'm going to shout out my wife, Barbara Formas, who's also a philosopher and who works in the philosophy of aesthetics, philosophy of performance, philosophy of dance. And early on, just after her PhD and during her PhD, she did a lot of research on this famous avant-garde dancer called Anna Halprin. So Anna Halprin was huge in the 1950s New York scene, where you had this amazing avant-garde dance exploding, influenced by John Cage and people like that. But unlike everybody else, she quit and went to California early. She left behind this like burgeoning, vibrant scene and went out to live in the woods in California. And with her husband, they built a dance kind of platform amongst the trees, supported by the trees, right? And she would dance every day. And she was very interested in not just synesthesia, but also bodily perception and perceiving her own body. And she would draw on paper her experience of dancing and how her body felt. And after a while, she started to notice that when she was drawing her experience of her body through this daily practice, there was something going wrong in like, I don't know, I think it was like her left side lower down. And there was like, she was using like dark crayons or something, or there was some kind of concentration of jagged lines or whatever. And after a while, she thought, there's something going wrong with my body here. It's not any of my limbs. It's not like I've twisted an ankle or anything like that. It's not like I'm not as flexible as I used to be. There's just something, and it's like an inner organ. Went to the doctor, did tests, and sure enough, she had a cancer. there.
Okay.
So she, because she was a dancer, talking about habit formation, right? She developed a far more accurate and sensitive perception of what was going on
Yes.
inside her body.
And
Right?
this is exactly the point that Spinoza is going to be getting us towards, right? The more thoughts that you have in relationship to your body, and not only your own body but everything else around you, the more you the more attentive you are to exactly what's happening, right? It's like the more you can do, the more thoughts that you have that are related to your body and bodies around you, the more you can do, the better equipped you are to being able to deal with it in exactly the same way that this dancer example worked. It's like this attentiveness to what is happening in the body, and it's this interesting, this almost, if you want to put it in psychoanalytic terms, it's like an unconscious. Like the unconscious was like pointing, in the form being expressed in the drawings, pointing to the body, right, and saying there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
What I think is really interesting about that too is like she was only able to notice that through like the practice of dancing and like explore moving their body and articulating and having their body interact with the world, right? This gets back to I think the original point that you had with Aristotle about people becoming more human the more they engage with the civic life. That developed it's kind of something similar, where you develop better understandings of justice, respect, civility, politics, etc. through engaging with the civil aspects of life. You become more human and like more part of the state through that engagement in the same way that someone would with their own body, experiencing, exploring the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your experience was, what does it mean to teach? How am I teaching? Right?
Yeah.
And seeing the reaction of your young recruits or whatever. And here it was like, is my body, how am I drawing this experience of the body? Yeah. And I also think what's interesting, my mother was a nurse, and she had patients. And one of the things about our language and our culture is we have an absolute paucity of language or of our capacity to describe pain.
Yes.
And so what the nurses would do is they'd carry around diagrams of the human body, give the patients a box of colored pencils and say, draw your pain. Yeah. Because most of the time, because they needed to know like exactly what is actually going on. Is it a burning pain, a stinging pain? Is it an ache? Is it a dull thudding? Like what is actually happening? Does it have a rhythm or whatever? And so people would draw their pain using these colored pencils, right? To try and like capture what was actually going on, and that's another, this is the thing about Spinoza. You can form new habits.
Oh yeah,
right. No, it's not just they're not just bad habits. They're also
Yeah, you're not perpetually stuck in your ways. Otherwise, I would have felt like this was an enormous waste of my time.
Yeah, exactly. yeah. Now, I'd like to go back to something technical just briefly. I want to go back to this difference in between us having adequate ideas and inadequate ideas.
Yep. Okay.
Because I know we're going to get into this in a later episode when we go into the difference between what's false and what's true. Yeah. But in your favorite Proposition 11, there's a corollary, right? And we mustn't ignore the corollaries.
Yeah.
And it says, when a human mind is adequately perceiving something, we are simply saying that God is having this, like God gets to have ideas, by the way.
Yeah, well, so, God has, not only does God get to have ideas, God has all of the ideas.
Right. So when I have an adequate idea, God is having an idea insofar, I'm quoting, right? Yes. Yeah. Don't argue with me now because I'm quoting, all right? You'd be arguing with Spinoza.
I've never done that in my life.
Don't argue with Spinoza. Insofar as he constitutes the essence of a human mind.
Yeah.
Right? So I have an adequate idea in as much as God is having an idea insofar as he constitutes the essence of our human mind. Right? Yes. In contrast, right, when I'm having an inadequate idea, we say God is having that idea not only as he constitutes the essence of my mind, but also insofar as he has the idea of something else along with my mind, right?
Oh, yeah.
So the way I understand this is that, and we're going to get into this later, is that when I'm having an inadequate idea, what's basically happening is I'm making a mishmash. I'm making an amalgam, right? Yeah. And actually, I'm making an amalgam. I'm getting something wrong. I'm confused in my ideas because an external body is impacting me.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm not able...
Let's take your young teenager who takes up smoking.
Yeah.
Right? Let's take Val.
Yeah, I'm no longer young, no longer a teenager, but
But you started smoking when you were a teenager, right?
oh yeah,
Right. You had a certain image in your mind when you took up smoking.
yeah, the
right?
correct image.
Right. If I'm not
Everyone looks cool.
mistaken,
No,
if
I
I
can
can
say
just
that.
reveal to our listeners here, Valentin favors roll your own
I
cigarettes.
do, yes.
Right?
Rollies.
Yeah. So there's a certain culture that comes with rollies,
Ah,
right?
yeah. It's called not being able to afford tailored cigarettes. So you external conditions impose upon you. Your financial situation usually determines what kind of cigarette you can afford.
You trying to tell me there were not any like heroes of popular culture in your imagination when you took up smoking rolled cigarettes?
No, because when I first took up smoking was here in Paris actually, with my cousins, and we would smoke the Gauloise, because smoking at that time, yeah, Gauloise is famous for not having any filters, so that's just like pure tobacco.
So sorry.
Yeah, and I loved it because for me that was what smoking was in my mind, and it was at a time where, I mean, tobacco was already really cheap in France compared to Australia, but they were dirt cheap back then. And what you could do before Australia imposed certain restrictions on its borders is you could buy cartons of cigarettes and bring them back into Australia. Now you can buy like a packet.
So you were basically a drug smuggler when you were younger.
Well, not a drug. No, it was legal back then. So I'd bring in a carton of cigarettes back to Australia, and I would give to, because we're all teenagers and we're like, yeah, we're cool, I can smoke whatever, and I'd be like, I brought these back from France, I'm gonna see if you can handle these, because I just like that's what I've been trained on, my habit. But yes, I mean, of course we all have images of people rolling cigarettes, and
I know. I mean, Val, you have perfectly proven my point.
Oh, yeah,
right.
No.
Basically,
that's why I told the story.
Yeah. So how can we use God to explain the idea of Val's like smoking habit, right? Mm-hmm. We explain it by God having the idea not just of the essence of Val's mind, because Val is not essentially a smoker.
No.
Val is a smoker insofar as he encountered the oh-so-Parisian myth of Serge Gainsbourg, or was it Jane Birkin?
Myth or reality? I don't
That's
know.
right. I hold that you took up smoking Gauloise Bleu because that is Serge Gainsbourg's cigarettes. Yes. Basically.
I mean, I originally wanted to be smoking the Gitan, because, but they don't really sell them anymore. But that also has a kind of, a certain image in my mind as well.
Yeah, it's like Yves Montagn's cigarette or something.
Could I give another example of that
please.
too?
Yeah.
I picked up smoking when I was in Afghanistan because it's just like, that's how you socialize. Everyone who socializes, everyone who gets a break at work are the people who go out to the smoke pit. We share a cigarette or two, we have a 15-minute conversation, and we go back inside.
We call that smoko in Australia. It's the designated smoking break from work.
So it's socializing. It's like it's like a relaxed chat with someone.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I was living in Korea, they also have a heavy smoker culture there. Different reason than for like the Parisian smoking culture, where I feel like it's a bit about excess here. In like Korea, it's kind of framed as almost a necessity that the work and labor they do is so like intensive or hard or for so long that they need these extra breaks in order to kind of compensate for the stress that they're receiving. So smoking not only was a social thing in Korea, but it was a way to de-stress from the labor they're already performing.
Right. These are perfect examples there, because you've got like the differentiation of different cultures because of the encounters of different bodies. Yeah. And there you've got like a certain work ethic built in with a certain rate of exploitation and a relationship to time whereby you need to sneak the smoke break as a kind of compensation.
Yeah.
Right. And there you've got an inadequate idea of you smoking, because actually it's the nicotine that's kicking in all the time, that's giving you the little boost or whatever. And if we were to, so saying God has the idea of the essence of your mind and the essence of other bodies, that's just Spinoza's vocabulary for saying, what would a scientific explanation be of your habit of smoking?
Yeah.
It wouldn't just refer to the essence of your mind.
No.
It would refer to you insofar as you encountered a work ethic, factory rhythms, smoke breaks, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other things that's quite interesting with that is, you have, particularly using different, cultures or just even different people, individual people's relationship to smoking, you have different sets of ideas that are attached to what are essentially the same physical body of like the cigarette, right? So if we take cigarette as a body, there's different sets of ideas that get attached to that body. And so this is another way we can kind of think of the relationship between the idea or thought and bodies. I was also scratching my head a little bit about this corollary on the metro over here, and I was reading it a little bit different. I mean, not in disagreement, but a little bit differently. Where I think he's having a shot at Descartes.
Really?
Because what is Descartes' idea of the mind? Right? It's just thinking substance, and then what's the little tether that Descartes has to do to get the mind, the thinking substance, in relationship with the external world, right? It's mind plus imagination, right? Imagination is the extra bit, right?
Yeah.
And Spinoza's basically just gone, well, you have an inadequate idea that you can't actually just contain that within the idea of the mind, right? The fact that you've separated out what we were calling in the podcast the life raft out. He's like, Descartes, you have an inadequate idea of what the human mind is. Yeah. So that was just a little thought that kind of occurred to me.
And we are going to get a whole theory of the imagination in here.
Yeah.
And this just leads me back to Hobbes, because one of the funny things about Spinoza is that he was deeply influenced by Hobbes, and not just by the political part of Hobbes' writings, but also by Hobbes's mechanist account of perception and memory and the imagination in the initial book 1 of the Leviathan, which is his anthropology. And there's this amazing thing that Hobbes says, which always strikes me, which is that what we call imagination, what he calls fancy, is decayed sense.
Yeah.
Right? It's basically leftovers, it's remnants, it's traces of sense perception. And he says that not only... So first of all, you've got like this terrible idea of leftovers, of remnants, right? What you're imagining is just like, a remainder of your everyday life.
I don't know. Leftovers can be pretty good the next day, Sometimes it's even better.
Tiramisu is better if it's been in the fridge for a while.
Exactly,
Then he says that our imagination is the origin of all of our passions.
Yes.
So none of the emotions we have are actually direct or authentic. They're always based on fancy. So we're in a fantasy world, just as Freud and Lacan will show later on.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
Who is that again?
Queen.
Of course.
Sorry. I thought you were a good Englishman.
And then, right, hang on. I'm going from sense to fancy to passion.
To Queen.
And leave Queen out of it. Okay. And then all passion. Now I've got Freddie Mercury and Live Aid in my head, right? All passion.
Passionate people, for the record.
There you go. Yeah. All passion envelops action. So actions and passions are on the same plane for Hobbes. There's no distinction between them.
Yeah.
Right. There are no like heroic willpower exerting like agents as in Aristotle. We're just in a sea of passions, and some of them just get to be called or actions, right? They get singled out, right? And so basically decayed sense perception is what leads to all actions for Hobbes. So you've got this mechanist kind of like cause and effect.
Yeah, that's super interesting because we'll come back to this when we get into Spinoza's theory of emotions. But I have a similar reading of how the passions operate in relationship to reason. But also just speaking about Hobbes's influence on Spinoza, one thing that I always found really fascinating reading the Leviathan is that he has a section on religion, I can't remember where he says basically that human beings produce myths when we cannot identify the causes for things.
That's most of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
If you follow Spinoza, most of the time we can't identify the causes of things.
No, exactly. Yeah. But that's this whole critique of theology, like we've created all of these kind of religious myths and miracles and things to try and explain things, or to try and give an explanation, but it's part of our imaginary. And Hobbes says something, I only just made the link then because I'd always kept it separate. I was like, oh, that's a really good point in Hobbes. But then, that's also something that Spinoza takes up very concretely. The fact that we produce myths, ideas, etc., when we don't know the causes for things.
So we have, the next question, of course, right, is if the human mind is the idea of the body, then what is the human body?
Ah, yeah, okay.
I don't know, Val. Are we up for taking this one on, or?
I think we're gonna have to leave it for next week.
So we're gonna spend a whole week wondering what on earth these are. These bodies are that we have.
I was already so anxious because Descartes kept us holding on for so long about what is the body, etc. Now we're gonna have to wait another week. It's just like
it's super simple, Val. Like, do you have a simple body? Or do you have a composite body?
I hope it's competence.
Competence.
I hope I contain Whitman's multitudes.
On that note, dear listeners, I think it's time to come to an end. I'd like to thank Daniel for coming on board with us.
Of course, thank you guys for having me. It was always a pleasure talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you for being such a fantastic interlocutor. And
that's right. And we'll see you next episode 21.
Episode 21.
What is a body? Exactly. Now we're old enough to drink, we can finally have a body.
Yeah, we can talk about more substances than one.
Yes.
All right. See you later.
Bye-bye.